Welcome to Inner Voice of Knowing podcast. I'm Kaye Doran, a shamanic leadership coach and healer, guiding you through life with a foot in both worlds. When you understand the terrain of the inner landscapes, the mental, emotional, spiritual and energetic, you will become the leader within your physical life, both personally and professionally. After all, the power of change is in your hands. Let's get this journey started. Welcome back to Inner Voice of Knowing podcast. I've sort of got a little bit of a laugh in my voice because before I press record, John, Anthony and myself have been having a connect and we've never spoken before. And boy, am I excited to have this conversation. John is the director of Transcend with a background in positive psychology, neuroscience, cognitive behavioural therapy. I think there's a few others there. Deep experience in music, film, theatre, education. And then I saw in your bio it was written about, you bring an effervescent magic to everything that you do. And I've already experienced that when I saw you on LinkedIn and definitely here now. So let's get the magic happening. Welcome, John.
Kaye, thank you so much for having me. It's funny, isn't it? We were having a blast before we press record. Sometimes it's best just to plummet into the deep end, isn't it?
It is. And I always say to my guests, this is a conversational journey. It's like weaving this tapestry. And this is exactly what it is, where we're not in our heads. We're in that connection between the heart brain, which is sort of the buzz way to say it, where I call it harmonic resonance. And
Great.
Yeah.
I think it's a great way to say it. And I think you're onto it. And, one thing I can tell that you do that works is you're already instinctively, to me, someone who's clever at creating the container. Sometimes I like to use the word cauldron. I know a lot of people don't like that type of language, but you gotta create the container, because then what you're doing is you're setting up the conditions for emergence. And this is something that I love getting into, because I'm one of those people who's very passionate about the absence of an agenda. And that's why it would appear that you and I are off to such a great start, because we don't know where it's going to go. And that's what makes it so exciting.
And, making assumptions. It's like, let's just be present in whatever unfolds here today. And if anyone, when they're listening to this podcast, you've got to then go to YouTube. A few days later, I'll put the video version up, because I just think the facial expressions, the smile, just everything will just draw us in. Give us a little bit of a background story, John, about, the music and everything, and how did it sort of morph or evolve into what you do now? Because you work with teams and leaders and sort of that corporate environment, which is calling out for this level of change and insight, grabbing the missing part to the whole,
Absolutely. Oh, well, thanks so much for asking. It's a fun career history, because I could admit to you that for me, it began purely with a personality construct where I was obsessed with the idea that I was a musician. And I remember how it happened, Kaye. As a little kid, as an Aussie kid, to do a stereotype, I got pushed into a lot of sports. And I can remember as a little boy playing, football and cricket and tennis and a bunch of others. But what I remember more was that I sucked at all of them, okay? I really wasn't good. And then when I was about 7 or 8, I'll never forget this day, a man came through our primary school with a keyboard, and he said, "I'm just coming to check if anyone here knows how to sing." And he brought us into a room one by one and started playing notes on the piano and just asked us to sing. And Kaye, it turns out that I had the voice of an angel, right? And so it's one of those sliding doors moments in your childhood, but it began right there at 8, maybe 8 years old. I went into it. I'm John. I'm the musician, and that sort of decided the trajectory of the next couple of decades. I joined choirs. I went to university and studied music. I was in the Australian Opera. I front rock bands. I play guitar. And so for a very long time, that wasn't the only thing that I cared about. But if I'm really honest with you, it was the only place that I put any self-worth. I had this idea that that's why I'm here and where I can add value, and everything else felt a little bit like a pantomime or pretend. So that was a big cerebral leap for me, was to start to arrive at a place that yes, I love the music and I'm still playing and
Yeah.
I always will, but maybe there's a bit more to me, and that took me a long time to accept that because I could admit to you that even in the early days of Transcend, there was that voice, even when I'd be up in front of big audiences, that would whisper to me and say, "You're pretending, you're a muso and you're pretending to know how to do this."
Oh.
So it's been this incremental, shape
Yeah.
shift. Where I arrive at a place where I go, no, I'm this and I'm yes and, or I'm a muso who's also now very versed in the universe of adult learning, education, and all that stuff that you wove into the bio. I'm not going to bore everyone with the bio again, Kay, but it's a transferable skill, isn't it? I got really good at reading the energy of an
Yep.
audience as a little kid, and without realizing it, I was developing that power to not only read the energy of an audience, but influence the energy of an audience. I know.
Can I ask you there, John? Sorry to cut off, but I wanted to ask, there's a couple of things here, John. You seem very eclectic,
Mm.
which I really relate to, right? I wanted to ask,
Mhm, mhm.
first question would be, was it that you actually felt home doing the music and feeling immersed in that, and therefore felt safe and familiar? So then the outside, everything else around that um, didn't feel as safe or familiar.
Kay, your instincts are phenomenal, and I'm so impressed that you said that because I actually only realized this in the apocalypse. Okay, so as we as we arrived at the pandemic, I don't know if you can relate to this, but everything fell through my fingers, and it was horrible timing as my beautiful daughter
Oh,
Phoenix
great
had just
name.
been born, and I'd said to, oh, thanks, mate, and I said to my wife, if you want to stay home with her. I remember it. I was a bit smarmy. I said, "Babe, if you want to stay home with the baby, I got this, right? I'll take care of everything." And then I had my whole year gutted and 11 months of work deleted. And I ended up in therapy. I ended up in
Yeah.
therapy about this. But Kay, you uncovered just then what took a few months. The question surfaced really early. Who is John Anthony without the
Yes.
mic?
Yes.
Isn't that interesting? Who is he without the mic? And I'd never been asked that question before, and I didn't have the answer. It took me a long time to arrive there. But I think, if you're really two dimensional about it, you could say, oh, I get it. He's a muso, he's had success on stage, and he needs an audience so that he can get a clap. He needs that round of applause. It's an ego
No.
based thing. No, not at all. It's got nothing to do with the clap or the applause or even the attention. It's exactly what you said, Kay. I feel safe when I'm up in front of a bunch of people. I feel safe, which means that when I'm
Yeah.
alone, right? And when I'm not doing it, when I'm not doing Transcend and bringing energy and trying to be helpful, I'm not safe. I don't feel safe. And so you were able to arrive at the nucleus of it straight away. That's what it
That
is.
leads into the second question. All right. So the second question
Mm-hmm.
is, are you reading the energy, or like me, are you absolutely feeling it? And again, that would pertain to that feeling of safety, because energetically,
Yeah.
I can even tell now when you speak, your field moves out, it connects, and then it receives, and then it moves out
Yes.
and it receives. So when that's taken
Yes.
away, it's then where does that exchange come from?
Exactly. And where am I? Where's
Yeah.
my reference points? So to answer your question, it's almost a sequence. I walk into any room. It could have 30 people. It could have
Yeah.
2,000 people. And I feel, and then
Ooh, chills.
alchemize. And that's the change.
Yeah.
That's the change, isn't it? Because I realized years ago that part of the reason why I love what I do and why I get to do what I do often is because I'm really good at changing the energy, Kay. I
Yeah,
can
well, I
change it.
completely understand that. And let's talk into that a little
Mm,
bit, because that's
mm,
a topic that I love, about presence
mhm,
and the
mm,
introduction of
mm, mm.
understanding that when we're in that harmonic, connected state, we have the
Yes,
ability to influence from our presence. And when we really grasp and understand that, we are less likely to be influenced by a heavier energy, right?
Isn't it great? I mean, it's such a. I just chuckle because it's so awesome when you know that, because it means that you get to wield not only an understanding but a power. And I don't mean
Yeah.
power in a grubby control way. I just mean you can say, because let's be honest, sometimes I read and feel and it's not good, Kay. Okay, it's not good, right? But you don't need to take
Yeah.
that ricochet and let that speak into your experience. Or another way through that I really enjoyed is, you read, feel, and then you have to connect to alchemize. And that's the chasm that we need
Yes.
to cross. You know better than me. A lot of people are caught up in their day and their life and their misery and their burnout and their preoccupations and their unhelpful thinking patterns, and then they've been knocked into a low vibration, and often without any even awareness that they're
Yeah.
in survival mode. And so you've got to connect with them, and that's part of it. Be there, be present, read, feel, connect, and then from there we can begin the alchemy. But you got to do it subtle, and you've got to do it in a way that's really bespoke and customized to every context.
Isn't that still music?
Mm.
Like musical
Well, what a
notes,
what a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
That's it. Exactly. Yeah, it's a tapestry of connection, and there's influence there. And let's be honest, the music thing's fun to think about because not everyone likes your song. Not
Yeah.
everyone's song is everyone's
Yeah.
flavor. And I think maybe that's part of what you and I get to do. You become quite clear on
Yeah.
what your song is. And so when you're doing it, it's coming from a place that's really authentic. And I think, often what that means is that a lot of people are on board really early, and even the antis, even the naysayers, graduate to a place of tolerance, right? And sometimes that's
Yeah,
enough.
and that sort of
Sometimes that's
leads
enough.
into because that musical reference, right? And so
Mm,
I always
mm.
say, every note on the piano is beautiful, but you put some notes
Mm.
together and they just don't work, and some do. But as we're
Yes.
growing and going through some of those challenges, like you said, through the big C and needed therapy, there's that growth
Mm-hmm.
opportunity. But
Yes.
I have really come to understand, John, for myself, that as I continue to move up the scale, some of the notes that have been with me
Mm.
for a long time choose to stop, and then therefore those chords don't sound so great together anymore, and that's okay. There's new
That's
notes
right.
to be met,
Mm.
up that scale.
Beautiful. Well, it's a lovely analogy, because let's think about this too. Some of those notes aren't going to serve you because you've shifted
Yeah.
into a different key. And along with that, your context is different. The climate, the people, the industry, the essence, the age, where it's falling in this buckled Gregorian calendar. You're moving into a new key. And so if you're in a new key, not all of those notes that served in a previous context are going to work. It's such a fun way to think about it, because I often think about, that beautiful song by Leonard Cohen, Hallelujah,
Oh,
the one that Jeff Buckley's covered, the one that
do
KD
I
Lang
love that?
annihilates. It's
Yes.
a fantastic song. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, that's a tune. But where he talks about, he says, I heard there was a
Mm.
secret chord. There was a secret chord, right? And I often think about that secret chord that David played, and apparently it pleased the Lord, whatever
Yeah.
people's connection to
Yeah.
to the higher power is. But isn't that nice to think about it? You got to find a secret chord, and I've found that in my game, the more notes you have access to, the more likely it is that you can find the right secret chord, but it has to be a combination. And I learned that the hard way when I got qualified and obsessed with positive
Okay.
psychology, right? Because, if you're just playing that one note, let's call it the positive psych note, right? And you step into an ecosystem where people are burnt out and depleted and the furthest thing away from thriving, and getting out of bed is a miracle and basic
Yeah.
hygiene is amazing, and they're either suffering a serious mental health concern, or even a mental illness, and then you walk in with your one note and say, hey everybody, it's time to keep a gratitude journal, right? If anything, that's
I was going to say that's a
offensive. Like
discord,
your
isn't it?
attempt at
It's
being
very
helpful.
jarring
It
for them.
is.
Yeah.
It is. It's jarring. You're onto it. And so it's fun, isn't it? You think about the secret chord, and I think, okay, so one of the notes in that chord might be positive psychology, but that's not going to
Yeah.
hit everyone. That's for a handful of people who are already thriving, or at least past what that dangerous word that they call normal. Okay, they're on the other side. So there needs to be more in the chord. And I think you're onto it. You got to drop some notes, you got to add some notes, you got to think about what key you're in, and then try to strike one that hits home in
I
every
love
context.
conversations like this, John, because I love to
Mm.
hear these things spoken about in unique and original language, like the original language that's coming from you, and then the storytelling that's around that, rather than just pure concepts, because the pure concepts spoken in the way that's on everyone's books on the shelf, and do you know what I mean? It doesn't change anything. So this kind of sharing, storytelling,
Yes.
weaving of energy is more likely to be threaded
Yes.
through listeners and then exchanged back.
Well, Kate, you've hit it on the head. The mythopoetic lens for me is one of the only ways through, because we get to explore the
Yep.
power of language, and we get to embrace that beautiful idea that words are like
Yes.
spells. And so you might want to argue that you owe it to people to find myriads of ways of talking about things, because if you don't, you run the risk of leaving a lot of people behind. You leave them behind. I'll never forget hearing this from a guy named Cam Rosson, a really interesting character. He said, you can hear the same idea from 5 different people, and it just slides off you like
Yeah.
Teflon. But then a 6th person comes along, and they share the same idea, but they do it with such a word choice, with such a turn of phrase, on such a frequency, that this idea makes it through to you for the first time. And I think that's exactly what you're getting into. There's a way of talking about things, and sometimes someone needs to be exposed to something they've heard 100 times, but it needs to hit them just so. And maybe that's
so
what we're getting
mine
into.
comes from, I haven't been taught externally. So this podcast isn't about me, but that it's come from this deep inner knowing I was born with, right? Where does it come from
Yes.
within you? Because you are not speaking and presenting and using the same dialogue that thousands educating in this arena are bringing to the table. And no judgment on them. I'm just saying that for me, unique voice,
Yes.
unique language, that uniqueness of where does it come from within you?
I'll tell you something really cool. One of my best friends, Nicholas Brown, he's an actor. And when I was going through the therapy that I mentioned, I said to him, "Hey, Nick, my therapist wants me to know who is John Anthony without the mic." And I don't know how to answer him. I might get emotional because this really moved me. And he's known me since I was 9. And so I said to him, "Who am I without the mic?" And he said to me, "You're a poet. You're a poet." And I never thought about myself that way, but he reminded me that I've been writing poems since I was, 11. I've been writing songs since I was 19. And so I think that's the quickest answer to your question. Like, I think I bring the poetic lens to the stuff that I learn. And so it's not enough for me to know it, and there's a fun conversation about knowing and understanding and whether they're the same thing. I don't think they are, right? But for me, yes, I get a lot of education. I don't think I'd be very good at my job if I didn't go and learn things. The last thing I studied was an advanced diploma in the neuroscience of leadership. But once I get the grubby facts, right? Now the fun begins. I can go, okay, but what's my way of talking about this? How am I going to spin this out? How do I plan on letting it ripple out of me, so that it does 2 things? One, keeps me amused and entertained, because you know better than anyone, you got to be interesting to be interested, or you got to be interested to be interesting. And then, and what is that point of difference that maybe lets you be that person that lets the same idea finally make sense to someone? Because I bet with your inner knowing, Kaye, that I bet you've come to discover that everyone who's here is saying exactly the same thing. Everyone's saying the same thing. They've just got their own different way of saying it.
And that's what I love. It's like, gosh, if you only got to eat bananas every day for the rest of your life, that's a little bit boring. But if you've got a fruit platter of choice, yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yeah, absolutely. From your perspective and your background, do you also feel that for you it's because it's an integrated lived experience. So you're not just taking the knowledge of
Yeah.
what you're learning,
Mm, mm.
you're then
Oh.
applying it and living it.
You've got such great instinct. Your instincts are amazing. You're very good at this, Kaye, if anyone hasn't told you recently. I tell you when it hit me the hardest was when I was first doing positive psychology. I was studying positive psychology at Langley, and the lecturer said, J.A., you can't just learn positive psych at the theoretical level. You need to live and breathe this stuff, okay? You need to live and breathe it and do it. You can't just learn it abstract and explain it to other people. And at the time, I remember thinking, no, thanks. I'm just going to learn it and then show it. You know, I'm an educator. I don't have to get into this. But then you look at it for a second and you realize, well, this is literally the study of people with high levels of optimism and well-being. And what can you take and learn from these people to impact your own resiliency and your own well-being and optimism? Do you want to thrive and flourish, or do you want to just survive? And so that was a real moment for me. I thought embodying it is essential if you've got any chance of ever influencing anyone else with it. But then behind that began the real journey when I became obsessed with metacognition and introspection. And because I've spent the last forever trying to educate people about the mind and about mindsets, who better to use than yourself as a case study? And so, Kaye, I can admit to you that I've driven myself to the brink of insanity with this, but that's the only reason why I know how to talk about it, because I live and breathe it every day.
You know, what a colourful journey. Let's lean into resilience a little bit now, because again, that is a word that is bandied around, right? And all the words that get bandied around, I'm all about, the power questions. Let's ask a deep question that
good.
That has to be in asking the power question in the right way. It brings up truth from within, right? It's not an instant thing. It's that journey that unfolds, and then, wow. And I don't believe most people are not asking enough power questions of depth. So from your perspective, what is resilience and where does it come from?
Yeah, it's a good one. And I think you're onto it. I think, a word like resilience has definitely in deep danger of turning into a corporatized, overused buzzword, in the same way that, and often when that happens, it gets rendered really kind of two-dimensional, and it gets tied into compliance training, and the whole thing just starts to feel thin because it's overdone. But my favorite way into it is, a lot of people, when they first hear the word, they think, that's right, it's tough. Resiliency is build a callus, bounce back from adversity, navigate change, overcome obstacles. But I think when people look at the word in a way that's two-dimensional, it has sort of a hardness to it. I need to be resilient. I need to be able to ricochet. And in that way, I think that's dangerous, because it, for my money, isn't deep feeling enough. You're not going there properly. It's almost you're running avoidance and using this word resiliency as a maladaptive
Do you think it's
coping
also
strategy.
a bit of a stance of, bring it on, you fight almost as well? I'm tough enough to, you bring this on. Yeah.
I can do it, That's it. Or that idea of, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I think, well, that's absurd. That's insane, and it sort of flies in the face of the human experience. And there's a real absence of empathy there, because no one really understands anyone else's, trauma or their history. And so my way towards it, my link into resiliency is embracing interventions to push up your own levels of optimism and well-being. And this is where it starts getting really slippery. I'll never forget walking into a CEO's office, and I said, "Hey, I'm ready to come and talk about positive psych." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I can come and help." And he said, "Help with what?" And I said, "I can help people be happy." And he went, "Get out of my office,
Oh my gosh.
hippie," right? Because there's a right and there's a wrong way to talk about this, And what I've come to realize is that when you get people to start to play around with interventions that move them up into that kind of green zone on their mental health, so they are thriving or flourishing or doing some of these annoying positive psych buzz terms, from that place, as their calibrated normal, what we find is that when they cop a knock and have to navigate change and bounce back from adversity, they begin to slide back down on their scale of well-being, but they're already in a much better place than they were if they were starting
Yes.
from zero. So this is that broaden and build thing that you hear about all the time, in the world of positive psych, which I'm really passionate about. It's not enough just to be okay, or another way that I like to put it, Kaye, if you're okay, well, that's great, because now your resource to do the real work, which is to get yourself to a place where you're doing particularly well.
I call that
And
a
I think
below
that's
the
where-
line word. We have below the line language
That's it.
and then the above the line language. And it's
Yeah.
okay is like another throwaway line too, isn't it?
Okay is like fine, or you might say okay is like meh, M-E-H, and it's not enough. Or the best way to put it, if you're bringing yourself back to a baseline that is okay or fine or meh, then it simply means that you're not resourced to behave in a way that's resilient. Every road bump that you hit, you're going to slide back down into what they call the deficit. And the research there is overwhelming. From that place, if we want to play around with these colors, if you're amber on your mental health or going into crimson, it's much, much harder to get out of the dark, to climb out of the mud from there. And so for me, it's a muscle that you want to build on. You got to get to a place where you're thriving, so that for that reason, it's easier to be resilient.
What happens from, the neuroscience side of yourself and the brain? Because I learnt years ago, and I also teach this, that the disconnect that happens when we're not honest with ourselves and the brain's going, not true, not true. Do you know what I mean? So I created this phrase back in my 20s, which is, I'm challenged yet well, right? Which means I can be, because I can be, because you can be challenged in one moment, the next moment you're having a laugh with someone, or so challenged yet well. From your background, what is happening when we're using words like just sort of okay, or we're not being truly honest with what's really going on, if anything happens at all?
Well, it's scary because your brain is trapped in a little black box. It's actually got no idea what's going on. And this is so fun to talk about, okay? It's trapped in the dark for your whole life. And all it really is a future predicting machine making guesses based on previous experiences with an overarching goal to keep you safe. That's
powerful.
it. That's all it is, right? And so as very quickly as I begin to understand that, it almost got demystified. Now, I'm not taking away from the brain. I think it's amazing. But one beautiful thing that we have to marinate in immediately is that you are not your brain. You're not your brain. And I know that you already know that instinctively. But it's a fun thing to get into, because quite often people attach to their thoughts, or they attach to their ego, and they operate on the assumption that the voice in their head is them. But it's not, because let's think about it. If you can hear a voice in your head, then who's listening to that voice? That's the real you, isn't it? This is your conscious awareness. And when you start to get up into that throne of your conscious awareness, from that meta position, you can start to look down at your thoughts and down at your feelings, and you can start to challenge what they call cognitive distortions. And so that voice in your head that you mentioned, Kaye, one of my favorite things to ask myself is, it'll serve something up. Remember, future predicting, guessing with an overarching goal to keep you safe, which means often wrong. And when it says something, you get to ask this question: hey, is what's going on right now up in my noodle, is this true and real, or is it a mental event that doesn't correspond with reality? And you would be amazed how often that's what it is, right? I'll give you one of my favorite examples. So Lisa Feldman Barrett, an absolute legend in the game of neuroscience, a really heavy hitter, one of my favorites. And Lisa Feldman Barrett wrote a book a few years ago called How Emotions Are Made. And she's flipping a lot of research on its head about micro expressions and other things. But she's got this amazing piece of research that she calls the mental inference fallacy. And I'll give you an example of how it plays out. So let's think right now, Kaye, you and I are doing a podcast. For me, it's around 11:30. You're there in Perth. So what have you got for me, my friend? 9:30? I can't do maths. 8:30. And I start thinking to myself right now, ooh, I've got a weak feeling in my belly, okay? And so my brain straight away says, weak feeling in belly. What does that mean? Does this remind me of something from the past? Yes, that means you're feeling nervous. That means you're feeling anxious. That means you're not having a good time. That means the podcast isn't going well. That means Kaye doesn't like you. You see what's going on? I'm running away with a bunch of bullshits, right? And then I realize, oh, hang on, I haven't had breakfast. I haven't eaten. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a sensation that's physiological and I'm attaching something to it that's psychological. My brain is trying to make a connection and it blew it. I've got an empty stomach because I'm hungry, but my mind has gone, hey, J.A., you're nervous and you're doing a shit job on the podcast, right? And so I grab hold of it, Kaye, and I run away with this. It's the mental inference fallacy,
Well, even
and
the
we
way
do
you
it all the
spoke
time.
about it, your speaking got faster and faster, which really is like what happens, isn't it? It just builds momentum and just, run away.
Oh, and it's just so hard. You know, a really simple and crass way to put it is don't buy into your own bullshits. You know, I think there's so much that we tell ourselves that isn't healthy, you know, or another way to think about it is it's just trying to keep you safe. And one of the ways that I heard it put once that I thought was really powerful, you know, your mind is like a thermostat and you kind of set it yourself based on your previous experiences. But it's a thermostat, which means that whenever it starts to get pushed outside its normal temperature, it automatically switches on and it returns you back to where it was before, that original
like the hotel
cool
rooms
state or
and you gotta change the
whatever it was, right? That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't let you change it. But this is where you're arriving at it. That's why so many of us struggle to change, because a lot of us are wired, you know, a synaptic tapestry of familiarity that wires us to a place where the thermostat is locked down because our mind is saying, hey, you know what? This worked before, so don't muck around with it because it's probably going to work again. But it doesn't mean that it worked well, and it doesn't mean that it's the best way. Familiar doesn't equal what's right. Familiar doesn't equal what's true and real, but your brain, energy conserving, loves what's familiar, and so often it'll drag you back. And Kaye, that's why so many of us struggle to leave relationships that we know are bad, to get out of jobs, to move to new suburbs, because your mind is the thing that's holding you back. Fascinating.
I feel like we need a hallelujah in that one. And I call it out. I call them false stories and beliefs, because I feel like if we keep calling them our beliefs, we're instilling that they have power over us. When we call it out, that's my false story and belief. I'm not putting I'm not plugging into it. It's keeping me as that observer. It also says I've acknowledged it's there, right? Because everything likes to be seen and heard and validated, but not necessarily put in the driver's seat, right? And again, it's a shift in language that, you know, for 35 years when I've shared that with people, it seems to flick that switch from going down that rabbit hole and running too far off with it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Don't follow it. Don't follow your own rabbit hole. Don't run away with yourself. And so that's a beautiful way to think about it. Is this a false story? Is this a false belief? And, you know, a lovely thing that I snuck in earlier that I got from cognitive behavioral therapy is often when you're getting triggered in a way where you're feeling emotional or you're trying to get on top of your behavior, one of the cleverest questions you can ask yourself is, does this look or feel like something from the past?
Power question.
You know, because the second you realize that it does.
Power question.
Yeah.
Or,
it's good,
you
isn't
know,
it?
can I say 100% beyond a shadow of doubt that this is true?
On the money. Another great one, Kaye. Where's the evidence? You know, so you're stepping up to do a presentation. You're thinking, I'm going to blow it. I suck. They're going to think I'm a loser. I'm not smart enough. I shouldn't be here. I tricked my way into this. I don't have enough letters after my name. I'm going to blow it. And then you say, well, hang on. Where's the evidence?
Yes.
Where's the evidence that you've bungled presentations in the past? You know, one of the terms they use in CBT is ANTS, ANTS, automatic negative thoughts.
Yeah.
Right. And so you say, this is an ant, you know, this is an ant that's climbing into my head. And they talk about stomping on the ants. There's no evidence here. You know, this isn't true and real. It's my own mental event. It doesn't correspond with reality. And then you get to sort of rewire in real time.
And then you get to hear the opposite of that voice, which is your inner voice of knowing, power and potential. Do you know what I mean? So when
That's
people ask me
it.
about the reality of that, I go, well, you listen to all this negative, that you're useless, you're not worthwhile, you're not this. You don't think there's not then the counterbalance to that, you know? Yeah.
Exactly. And that's one of my favorite interventions is we love listening to that voice. And remember, it's easy to listen to that voice. You know, there's old buggy wiring in our mind trying to keep us alive from 2,000 years ago. You know, Rick Hansen, he puts it really clever. He says, negative emotions grip
Yeah.
like Velcro, positive emotions slide off like Teflon. And that's just how we're wired. You're out on a field, you know, we hear this story a lot, aren't you? You're on a field, you're an early human, there's a saber-toothed tiger running at you. You're thinking, don't come back here ever again. You're not thinking, oh, look, there's a dandelion. You know, I'm going to pluck and sniff it, okay? Because one of them is keeping you alive and the other one is inconsequential. You know, but the problem is we've got to remember that we're all living in the echo of our ancestry. And so even though you and I didn't have to worry today about staying alive, that old buggy wiring, that programming is still in there, you know, and it's still jumping up all the time, scanning the world for things that could be potentially threatening and showing them to you over and over again. And so it's this idea of trying to find a way not to listen. And I like the way that you put it, Kay. Acknowledge it. Say, okay, I've heard what you've said. You know, I understand that you have these concerns, but then you get to make a conscious choice about the positive deviance.
Wow. Where for you, our listeners are going to have to come back and listen to this quite a few times. There is so many gems you're just throwing down. The heavier energy, the denser energy, I say it's like a rock. The higher frequency is like a feather, but it takes a lot of feather to create the wings, right? You know, and which one do we feel impacted by the most? So the other big conversations that are around at the moment are the nervous system and the dysregulation of the nervous system. What would you want to speak into around that? And I observe in the work that I do a lot of people that are, rather than dysregulated, I like to say disconnected because it creates a break, right?
Yes.
And they're so used to feeling that way, it would take something extreme for them to recognize it, right? So for me, I was so used to being bullied and abused that when I re-entered the workforce at one point, it didn't matter what role I went into and didn't matter how far I progressed, bullying followed me. And then I had to recognize that it needed to become so extreme because it was so familiar that I wasn't aware of it.
Interesting.
So, you know, I observe a lot of people that in that disconnect or dysregulation, and they're not even aware of that stress level within them. What's your take into this?
Well, I think you're onto it. You know, if we go back to it, if we go back to the neuroscience, your brain has found a way to crystallize to this version of reality, right? So your baseline normal in that horrible idea that you become used to bullying, you sort of calibrate to that as this is my baseline conditions, this is the way that things are. But the really scary part about this is, as that becomes familiar to your brain, even if it's shrouded in hundreds of really maladaptive coping strategies, your mind thinks, hey, this is what works for us, which means this is what's safe, and even worse, this is how it's supposed to be. This is where I should stay. Remember, your brain's trapped in a little black box. It's got absolutely no idea what's really going on. It doesn't know. And so isn't that scary? And, you know, you hear a lot of stories like this where people, their logic is powerless. They'll say, I'm being bullied, I'm being harassed, I'm being abused, I'm unsafe, I'm really miserable. But the idea of trying to change or get out of that is really foreign to them. They wrestle with it. And the idea here is that somewhere on the subconscious level, their mind is telling them, hey, this is where you're supposed to be. This is where you're safe. This is where
it's based, you know, I'm wrestling with it, but I'm going to settle, like stay. Yeah.
This is these are my conditions. These are the conditions that not only I've calibrated to, but this is actually where I feel safe. And isn't that a horrible thing to think about? Your will and your reason and your logic is powerless because in many ways you're just being ruled by your conditioning and your subconscious programming. It's so fun to get into. There are some people that will go as far as suggesting that those first 7 years of your life is setting a blueprint for your entire existence. Bruce Lipton gets into this. He talks about the idea that you're observing and downloading a biological blueprint that then begins to govern every single decision that you make throughout all of your adult years. And we don't really have much power around what we're exposed to when we're that little, do we? And so I think
also feel
this is cool to think about.
I've raised my 3 kids, and then I've got another son that I inherited when he was 15, nearly 16 from another mother. And so
Congrats.
Here's what I personally have experienced. We already have certain lenses and certain experiences that we require as we're born. We've already got an imprint as well, if you like. And no amount of being positive or reaffirming or saying certain things can change what's already being carried. Can it be overlaid upon? Yes. But, I have 2 daughters and a son, and, I could say to one daughter, I love you, you're beautiful, and she'd be small. And then she'd come out half an hour later going, you don't love me, you love so-and-so more than you love me. And I'd just think, because I know that we've got the soul, imprint and experience. We've already got lenses on so that we can filter through that, which is why, 3 children did not have the same mother. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's because they were all perceiving differently. So to me, it's like that double layer, not just the 7 years. Because I need the parents to, not be so hard on themselves, because boy, were my kids were raised by a shaman and this positivity, and do you know what I mean? And there were just some aspects to them that were just like, no, thank you. I need to play this out. Yeah.
That's it. I'm going to play it my way. And, I love thinking about that way too, because I think the way that a lot of people struggle to move through any kind of self-awareness is they run blind, So rather than asking those types of questions of, hey, what is that lens that I see the world through? Or what is some of my early influence that shifted my values and my belief systems? If they don't want to do that, then they're not in a place where they're ready to challenge the way that they've been put together, or you might want to say even the way that they've put themselves together. And so I love the lens thing, because quite often people don't even realize that they're looking through a lens. And so you can't clear up or change out a lens that you don't know is there in the first place. It's crazy to think about that. Billions of people just blindly blundering through their existence, reacting to things, and often from a place of assumption without saying, hang on, what could it be about this? Could I be looking at this through a glass darkly? And what is this lens? And where did it come from? And am I willing to shine it up or start to possess that ability to change it out? Switch it out in real time, depending on context.
I suppose through my journey, I feel like I've climbed the ladder. So if I go out into my back courtyard now, I'm limited in what I can see. Right, because of the garage and the trees and and then I can stand up on the bench seat and I get a better view. And then if I climbed up on the ladder, a better view again. And I know the things that I believed once from what my mother said to me, that she was calling me stupid. As I changed my lenses and changed my view, I went, she wasn't calling me stupid at all. Do you know what I mean? I was taking upon certain things that she would say, and it was distorted through the lenses of Kaye.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the word. And I was just about to say it's a distortion, and it's a distortion of our own making. And I really appreciate you sharing that, Kaye, because I can relate to that. I can remember as a kid being in maths class and people would tip polydrons onto the floor, these geometric shapes that you snap together, and I went to sort of a bit of a, I don't want to call it woke, but it was a bit of an experimental
Okay.
primary school, right? So for the first 5 or 6 years of my education, it was a bit jazz, and so then I changed schools in year 5. And on the very first day, the teacher gave us all a piece of paper and said, "I'm just going to check how you guys are at maths." And he starts yelling out sums, 5 times 6,
Yeah,
2
yeah, yeah.
divided by 2 or whatever he's saying. And I remember looking around and seeing all these kids write stuff down. And I looked down at my piece of paper, and I tell you what I saw. I just saw my own tears falling
Yeah.
out of my eyes and wetting the page. But from that experience and in that moment as an 11-year-old boy, I had this distortion really deep. Oh, John Anthony is
Yes.
dumb. You're dumb, and I carried that for many years, many years. No one told me I was
Yeah.
dumb,
Yeah.
right? And no one went out of their way to make me feel dumb. But an experience like that, you can grab hold of it, you can distort it, bang down, flip it, and reverse it, believe it, and then ride it. You can ride it, and sometimes for too long. And isn't it scary to think that there are many fully growns among us who have attached themselves to these
Yeah.
false ideas of who they are and how much value they have and their potential and what they can bring, and they're deceiving themselves. They are so much more
And
than they
that brings me
realize.
back. It's like a full circle moment when you said, who are
Mm,
you
mm,
without the mic? And
mm.
asking someone that's known
Yeah.
you for a long time and the power of that
Mm, mm,
response. I think sometimes we need to
mm.
gather those that know us really well and ask, how do you
Yes.
see, but also how do you experience me?
Well, that's a beautiful idea. And, again, like going around in a lovely circle with you on that one, when we have those false narratives in our head, that voice telling us that we're garbage and being fed with what feels like really unhelpful advice, that's another lovely avenue. You say, well, hang on, this is the voice, this is how you're talking to yourself. But how would your best mate talk to you? If you
Yeah.
brought this same question to them or this same challenge or this same idea about yourself, how would a dear friend of yours respond? How would someone who loves and cares about you respond? What would they say to you? And why wouldn't you be more interested in listening to them than this garbage little signal that's up in your mind? Julia Cameron, who wrote that book
Yep.
called The Artist's Way, she's got this lovely turn of phrase where she says, who are those people in your life that are your positive believing mirrors? The ones that reflect back to you the best version of you. So I think you're onto it, Kay. You got to remind yourself about the power of community and sometimes take your lens off and maybe try to see yourself through somebody else's.
Yes. Well, I could just talk to you all day. What is one really driving message for you that you feel you'd like to leave the listeners?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I really enjoy that question. It's that's another one of your power questions, Kay. It's funny. So often I make videos and I upload them on LinkedIn and onto Instagram, and I do that because I'm trying to be helpful. But of course, I'm a sole trader, so I'm trying to remind
Yeah.
people that I exist. And often when I get to the end of my videos, I'll say to people, I want you to back yourself and I want you to walk
Oh,
tall.
nice. Yeah.
Transcend. It's a way that I sign off. But more recently, I've been getting pretty obsessed with Hermetic wisdom and the Kabbalion. And when you look at the principle of polarity, sometimes leaning too heavily in any one direction isn't useful. And so, what I've come to realize is that one of my big messages is yes, I want you to back yourself. Yes, I want you to walk tall. Of course I do. But backing yourself doesn't always involve believing yourself, because sometimes the things that you're telling yourself are wrong. They're not true and real. So trying to hold lightly any ideas that you have that your instincts tell you are not
Yeah.
self-serving. Be the kind of person who position yourself as a lifelong learner. Use your curiosity as an engine for growth. And in any exchange that you step into, in the interest of trying to add value, find a secret chord and play that to the people that you encounter.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's really so beautiful.
Cool.
Last question.
Thank
This
you.
podcast is
Yeah,
called
great.
Inner Voice of Knowing. Do you feel you have an inner voice of knowing? And if so, how has it served you?
Well, I love that question because the deeper I go in my spiritual journey, the quicker I arrive at that place that you often hear about, which is the more that you know, the more you realize that you don't know
Yeah.
anything at all. And something that I was talking about really recently was this idea that quite often people get caught up or preoccupied with the messenger, the person who's saying the thing, looking at someone as a guru or as an oracle. And that's an enormous mistake. And I remember hearing it put cleverly once.
Well, we're actually seeing that in the world now. Yeah.
Yeah, we really are. And so my inner knowing is this idea of, if you come across an idea or something that appeals or resonates with you really deeply, if someone is pointing to the moon, stop looking at their finger and look at the moon. Stop looking at their finger and look at the moon. And, I think that can be really powerful because then what you're doing is you're not getting preoccupied with where you heard it from, source or context. You're bypassing the knowing, you're arriving at the understanding, and really what you're doing is you're weaving your own tapestry. You're weaving your own tapestry of belief that you can use in an effort to serve you. And the best thing about that idea is it means that you can remain nebulous. You have room to absorb new things, but you're also just as open to cutting and culling things that no longer serve.
Oh, great answer. That is just fantastic. Thank you.
Great question, mate.
John, we will have your website at the bottom of the description. Is that the best way for people to get hold of you if they're intrigued to?
Yes, definitely. Well, thanks for asking, Kaye. The other two ways in, you can go to Instagram and type ja.transcend, or you can just go to LinkedIn. If you go to LinkedIn and type John Anthony Transcend, but I appreciate, some people don't like all platforms, so there's a few ways in.
What an absolute delight. It's been
Pleasure.
Today.
Genuine pleasure.
Thank you so much. And I know that there's a whole lot more that we could talk, and thank you for the generosity of your time, your wisdom, and your sharing.
It was a genuine pleasure. Thanks so much for your soul and your presence and your insight and your very, very high instincts and power questions.
Thanks,
Kaye, the
John.
pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
Join me on my next episode. And if you love this podcast, please subscribe by clicking on the plus button if you're on Apple, or like and follow on Spotify. Rate and review. And please share Inner Voice of Knowing with your friends.